So we want to turn from the question of how do you acquire the resources to what type of agreements do you use in forming some cooperative arrangement to get hold of what you need to prosper in the marketplace. The About three different things out there. We've already talked about market transactions, but the ones that we are also common include licenses, strategic alliance, joint ventures. Acquisition is important to consider, as is the choice for internal development. The type of agreement to pursue is influenced by a variety of factors. How fast do you need it? Is this really vital to your need? How hard is it to transport or gain access to it? Can it really be transferred? Need for flexibility, the risk, and so forth. Way to think about this is in the marketplace is obviously the best, least cost, least risk way of acquiring things. And if you can do so, especially for things that are important, where losing control or exposing it to the risk that somebody may copy or steal it are high, then you really should do it. You should do things yourself and buy the resource and develop it on your own. If you have something that has strong IP, as we've talked about, uh, licensing can be a great deal. Typically, it's a 7% solution, i.e., the royalties up to 7%. There's a chunk that comes up front, there's a chunk that dribbles in later. Um, you have options on extending the time horizons, and you put in some other agreements on it, but licensing is a relatively pain free, very common way of dealing with things that you have strong intellectual property on. They're best used for transferring simple codifiable things, technology, goods, services. They're done quickly. You can license, if you need something, you can license it from people quickly, discreetly, um, and they work pretty well. Yeah, you often don't have too much of a problem. There are some risks of license, but you don't. But those things I think are ideal. One thing license does allow is a learning opportunity. So if it's something that's complex you don't know how to do, one way you can minimize the risk of learning how to do something or experimenting with a new technology is simply to license it and use it for a while before making a major or strategic investment in acquiring that technology or in developing the good or service and what have you. Strategic alliances are a complex animal. They're an agreement between a couple of parties to engage in an extended range of activities. That can be distribution, it can be R&D, it could be manufacture. And they include a variety of complex arrangements. These include cross-licensing agreement. You could be independent parties and you simply license to give each other rights to use the other's technology. You could be and feel at risk in the agreement because one party, because of just unequal bargaining power. You can alleviate that by making an equity investment. So if you're exposed to risk, because if you're trying to deal with a big company, and if you reveal something to them, they could walk away with it. It places you at too much risk, but they really want it. And one way to offset the risk is simply for them to make an equity investment in you. Then, because they're a co-owner, they will be less likely to engage in activities that would leave you high and dry. Uh, you can also, one thing that usually helps and sometimes is vital to the development of a strategic alliance is to transfer personnel. Hire people specifically to do it, staff them in your office. You'll find in many strategic alliances that they will actually office some other company's employees in their headquarters. This is very common. Walmart, for example, has many buyers for any number of the companies whose products they sell, whether it be Black and Decker and so on. And they live and work at Walmart headquarters in Benton, Arkansas. There's also things about due diligence to enforce it. There's a variety of things that need to be negotiated. You can go through this as a checklist of reference if you need to take a look at it. But it's important to think about the breadth and depth of what a strategic alliance is and how you can safeguard yourself against the threat that somebody can take your idea and walk away with it and leave you high and dry. They're best used. The best way eventually is to create a strategic alliance in which you have a real partnership. You trust each other, you work well with each other. The problem is, how do you get from here to there? they're best used for things that involve complex activities with relatively high degrees of uncertainty, when each of you has something important to bring to the table, and by getting together, you make the entire proposition much less risky. They can be executed sometimes very quickly. Ones that are executed very quickly sometimes are risky because you probably did not spend enough time developing skills, expertise, in the relationship that you need. Um, and strategic alliances often fail. They need an awful lot of work. As I said, the transactions cost is high, and if parties eventually get lazy or don't deliver, they fall apart pretty quick because there's usually no one body there to get things going. The difference between a strategic alliance and a joint venture is this time you actually create a separate entity. This exists outside the walls of both your organization and theirs, and both put money in it together. You hire people, and it's got a variety of terms on the deal that specify exactly what's involved in creating the company, who owns it, how monies are spent, how money is spent, where it goes to, and so forth. Usually has its own board of directors and a variety of other things. So it feels like a company, but it's held by the two senior partners. They're used in a variety of circumstances. They're really commonplace in foreign market entry. They're common when it takes a long time to do something. Um, you may, as I said, joint ventures are common in aircraft engines. They form a joint venture to develop an engine for a new airframe, and that takes 5 or 6 years. Um, and so the joint venture itself becomes a very stable, effective platform to deal with that. It's especially effective because it is a good tool when both organizations need to learn something new and different. And the type of learning that would occur if you did it in either company's shop, if you will, um, that knowledge would not be as integrated, would not be as useful as if you had a team doing it together, so the knowledge can accumulate and be useful. The advantages here: it is a great learning tool. It's they're generally safe. They work very reliably. The disadvantages, of course, is that what happens when one party decides that this joint venture is not a good idea, that the returns on the investment are not worthwhile, so on. Now you've got a separate organization that's sitting there. The owners are disputing over its worth, and you, as the employee inside the joint venture, find yourself in a very difficult position where you discover that your future is very short indeed. Acquisitions are a great tool. If it's another form of market transaction, if a company has something that you're really interested in, what do? You try to buy it. The challenge here is that companies are comprised of both things that you need and things that you don't need. So acquisitions can be problematic, especially for the acquired firm, because many times what you'll find is the company is bought for specific purposes and certain things will be spun out, sold, um, and it becomes a challenge for the acquiring company. Acquisitions are also difficult to manage. There's cultural differences that make it hard for companies to communicate with one another. And the track record of performance in acquired firms uh, is often lower following acquisition than one would hope, due to the challenges that you have. Um, we have Adobe recently acquired Omniture here. Josh James is great. Omniture has been largely disassembled. Some major important components are left here, and other ones are now just sort of drifting away or been moved and transferred into other places. It's because of the influence of Josh James and some other people that the Omniture building down in Point of the Mountain, down by Cabela's, is here, and there's a few particular individuals involved who are very important, and those companies, those people are the reason that it's still here at all. So that's an interesting sort of development. Internal development, of course, is when you have R&D, you got a technology, you want to do it on your own. The challenge here is that you have to undertake a variety of investments, as we saw in questions of product development, product commercialization. It's iffy. You don't know. A great many projects fail to achieve economic returns, and so managing an R&D portfolio, developing a technology on your own is a risky decision. It really depends on a variety of factors whether this is the correct way to go about doing it. We have some data that organizations also develop patterns in learning how to learn. Companies that are dependent on, generally depend on internal resources, R&D, to learn, are a little bit less adaptive, slower to respond to markets than firms that have a history of being able to externally acquire information and then integrate it. A great example of someone who learns from acquisition, learns from the marketplace very well, is Cisco. Other companies historically have had challenges in trying to acquire companies, and there are any number of companies like that. These include Procter and Gamble, um, who succeed by developing their own products. They're not as good at acquiring products, and actually benefiting from the company itself. Generally, they buy the idea and they just turn it into a P&G thing. They don't really try to acquire a firm and use that strategically to enhance their own skill set. Um, I've talked about internal development here, and so the question that we're faced with is, when you're dealing with a strategic alliance, how do you succeed?